Good morning. Thank you, Representative Glenn and members of the committee for allowing me the opportunity to testify this morning. And I must say, I feel a little bit like the Will Ferrell character from Zoolander, where I kind of feel like I'm taking crazy pills, and that we've had this debate. We've had it, we had it for 2 years leading up to the end of session last year, and we came up with what I thought was a compromise everybody agreed to and signed off on, that the legislature wrote. The letter of the law and the intent of the law could not be more clear. The utilities, all sides signed off on this, and the governor signed it. And now it's before the MPSC to implement that law as it was written and as the legislature intended. And unfortunately, we're here relitigating some of the debates, some of the merits of choice versus not having choice. That's not what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on is simply, as others have pointed out, this was the product of many months of negotiation, of sometimes contentious debate. The Michigan Freedom Fund, I can't speak for the other groups who are part of the Pro-Electric Choice Coalition, but I can assure you that the Michigan Freedom Fund would have never signed off on this compromise and gone neutral to its passage if we had thought that this, among other things, that this local clearing requirement would be in the legislation, allowing the MPSC or others to kill choice and do so in a way that they couldn't get through the legislature. We would have done everything in our power to get people to no votes on this, and I think anybody who believes otherwise is either foolish or being disingenuous, because it took a lot for us to get to where we were as neutral in the beginning. And the second point I wanted to make is that this is a fundamental issue of what our constitutional system lays out. It's been discussed before. Representative Glenn, you've done a nice job, and others have done a nice job pointing out that the legislature writes the laws. It is the executive's role to implement them as it is written, as you have intended. I think it's malfeasance by the MPSC to be doing what they appear to be doing right now. The language was specifically removed. Everybody knows why it was removed. The gentlemen, the representatives who were in the room negotiating that compromise have stated publicly that it was removed for a reason, and we think that it's important to shine a light on these potential actions, I guess, by the MPSC, and we appreciate the work you've done to do that. The process did bear out. There was a debate. We reached a compromise. It's been signed into law. Let's implement it. I don't think we need to go about discussing, relitigating the issues of whether or not this is what you intended. We would have never signed off on this legislation and been okay with it. And I can't speak for others, but I'm pretty sure other groups like ours, and as you've heard from the testimony of others who were part of that process, they wouldn't have been okay with this. So those are the points I wanted to make. I appreciate the opportunity to make them, and thank you again for shining a light on this.
Thank you, Mr. Daunt. I think it's simply a matter of fact. Had this language not come out of the legislation, it would not have passed. It almost didn't pass anyway. But that was the key provision to protect the 10% electricity choice market. Otherwise, it would not have passed, period. Any questions from the committee? If not, we'll have, I'm sorry, Vice Chair Lisinski.
Let me just open with this, that I am supportive of a 10% choice market. So I'm asking my questions around kind of a go-forward basis. So we understand how our current choice market supplies energy to the state. And I agree that to put in place a requirement requiring a change in sourcing of generation capabilities that goes in place in a very short period of time would impact the electric choice market in a negative way in their ability to provide energy to the customers that they have. What my question is on the substance of the go-forward market. So if we look past 2018, if we look 3, 5, 7 years out on the generation resource and the planning for generation resources based on capacity 3, 5, 7 years out, which are based on how long it takes to create a generation resource, viable timeframes to look at. And if I reflect on the letter that Representative Affandoulis and Verheulen submitted, and their statement, we have strong concerns that the imposition by the Commission of any requirements on AESs In excess of those, MISO requires of all of load-serving entities, violates the legislative intent. Do you believe on a go-forward basis, as we're looking at 3, 5, and 7-year horizons, that there should be different requirements for energy suppliers in the choice market versus energy suppliers in the regulated utility market, and looking at the planning for the grid reliability on a medium to long-term basis?
Again, I appreciate your support of the 10% marketplace. The Michigan Freedom Fund supports a 100% choice marketplace. So getting to just simply protecting the 10% was a compromise to begin with, and I believe was the case for many involved in the debate. The points I am making simply are with the legislation as it is written, and what the MPSC is looking to do with what the memo that Josh and John laid out. It would basically rewrite the legislation and put additional
That's not what I'm
requirements on
asking
the
you.
alternative energy suppliers that
So-
were not intended to be there.
Are you saying that you believe the legislation states that for 5, 10, 20, 3 years out, that any choice energy supplier should be carved out and not considered as a partner in the stability of the grid, that as the stability of the grid, the generation resource, as we're looking at generation resource planning to make sure that we have enough generation, that we have stability across the grid, that we should not be considering those in the choice market in the balance of that equation, that they should have different standards than others who provide electricity in our state?
I would simply contend that these debates were all had during the 2 years leading up to the passage of the legislation. They were all addressed. Everybody was on board with the compromise legislation, and
I'm sorry, I don't
protecting.
think you're answering my question, and maybe I'm not being clear. So what I'm asking is, in the long term, do you think there is a different set of requirements that alternative energy suppliers should operate under as we are looking at our needs for generation capacity on a longer term basis?
I think that everybody should follow the law as it's written, and the legislation that was passed is written in a way that the MPSC is seeking to undo. I don't know. I think I'm being clear in that the legislation.
So would you say that then? No, because what I'm hearing from the authors of the legislation here, or the negotiate, as Representative Glenn has characterized them, the lead negotiators, that they have strong concerns about the imposition of any requirements on AESs in excess of those of load-serving entities. So load-serving entities is everyone who serves us in the state of Michigan. If we are exempting AESs from a local clearing requirement, and we want to go to 100% choice, then are we saying that there should never be any local clearinghouse requirement for any energy supplier? Do you even feel that's a viable criteria to put on any load-serving entity who operates in the state of Michigan, to have a local clearinghouse requirement?
I will be honest, I'm not versed in the specific details of all this legislation like others are. But I will point out we did have a full choice marketplace from the years of 2000 to 2008, and I believe it worked just fine.
We had
And
no one
we can-
using the choice market during those years.
We can go back. This is the point I've come up here to make. We're sitting here and we're relitigating all of these issues that were dealt with for 2 years. We passed a bill. The legislature, I should say, passed a bill. Everybody signed off on it. That was part of that process. It received support in both chambers of the legislature, and the governor signed it. I would expect the legislature to want the MPSC to implement it as they saw fit to write and as their intent provided, that the governor signed. And whether or not we agree with the specific policy we're debating here right now, everybody in the legislature on either side should be concerned about this type of usurpation of power by the MPSC or any other
So I'm asking that question because
executive
we
branch
have
body.
the authors, and they're stating their legislative intent here, and they clearly are indicating that they have MISO, who we all participate as a member organization, that looks at, their charge is the stability, reliability, and affordability of the grid. MISO, in their own letters to us as a committee, have stated that looking at the reliability of the grid is a responsibility of the state, therefore a responsibility of us. and that the authors of the legislation are saying that they do not want any requirements on AESs in excess of what MISO requires of any load-serving entity. So if MISO is saying that there are many facets to determining the reliability of a grid, your statement is that AESs should be exempt from some of those criteria.
I'm not trying to put words in anybody else's mouth, and I would appreciate that not being done to me as well. What I'm simply saying, and I'll reiterate again, I am here to discuss the legislation that was passed and what should be done in terms of the implementation. The MPSC, through the memo that was written and through the actions they have taken to this point, appear poised to undo what the legislature intended and what they very clearly put in law, what the governor signed. I don't know how I can be any more clear in terms of what my point is, and that's simply, we expect the executive branch to implement the law as it's written by the legislative branch.
So, okay. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Daunt, thank you.